It's Star Wars month, which means I'm going to have a Star Wars hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. And we're going to start off with Disney ruined Star Wars. Hang in there. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I like to talk about Star Wars as an allegory for politics and religion in our own world, because that's what it was written for. The Original Trilogy was made as a response to the Vietnam War and American imperialism. The prequel trilogy pulls examples from World War II and the American Civil War to talk about the rise of fascism, and the sequel trilogy started talking about the rise of neo-fascism. Star Wars has always been a reflection of current politics, and the sequel trilogy came out in a time when countries like the United States and Canada and the UK and Australia and India and Brazil had a lot of fascist rhetoric going around, until Disney ruined it. You see, Disney has this nasty habit of talking about systemic issues, but in the end boiling it down to a single bad guy. See, Tiana can't get a restaurant in Princess and the Frog for what seems like systemic racism in the financial sector, but really, it's just two bankers who get their comeuppance at the end. Mary Poppins Returns seems like a great indictment of the financial crisis in the housing market, but really, it's just one banker who gets his comeuppance in the end. Tomorrowland, I know you've seen it, talks about educational inequality, the commercialization of innovation, and even climate change, but in the end, it just comes down to one guy who gets his comeuppance. The sequel trilogy could have been an amazing indictment and even learning tool for neo-fascism, a crisis that the entire world is facing right now, but instead, Disney boiled it down to one guy who got his comeuppance in the end. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm going to be hosting a Star Wars hot take every day until I get canceled by the community. Day 2, Finn did not fit in with the First Order because of John Boyega. When you look at the officers of the Original Trilogy, they all have something very obvious in common. And the First Order try to replicate the Empire, and their officers, including Captain Phasma, have something very obvious in common. Even the stormtroopers that we don't see, like Daniel Craig here, or Prince Harry and Prince William, or Danny Harrison, all have that same thing in common, but Finn doesn't. There is just something about John Boyega's performance that doesn't match the Empire/First Order aesthetic, which is why I think he should have been played by John Boyega, not doing a silly accent. You see, the Empire is British, and that's on purpose. If you're going to make an anti-imperialism movie for Americans, you're going to take inspiration from the British Empire. Rogue One even turned this on its head by casting an Australian actor to make it feel like Director Krennic didn't quite fit in with the Empire. Now, I've read my comments, and I know you guys can't tell the difference between an Australian accent and a British accent, or even a fake American accent, but trust me, that decision worked. And John Boyega is British. He was doing a fake American accent for the movie, but if Finn was programmed from birth by the First Order, he should sound like the First Order. Now, when episodes 7 and 8 came out, I saw a lot of fan theories online saying that Rey is a Kenobi, because people think that accents are genetic. They're not. Rey has an English accent because she was raised by Unkar Plutt. And Unkar Plutt is British, so Finn should have been in the same situation. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 3, so let's go with Jar Jar Binks is the most important character in Star Wars. No, this is not a Darth Jar Jar theory, and I'm not just going to point out that he's the one that granted emergency powers to the Chancellor, eventually creating the Galactic Empire. Jar Jar Binks is the most important character for the whole franchise. Every time I show episode 1 to somebody who doesn't like Star Wars, they all come away loving Jar Jar. And that's on purpose. You see, Jar Jar is a low barrier to entry for new viewers. He's not a Jedi or a Sith or a Skywalker or Darth Sidious or anything that's referenced in the Original Trilogy. He's a new character from a new species, from a new planet, with a whole new personality. And he's the comic relief, which means that you get an immediate emotional connection, whether it's humor or annoyance. But more importantly than that, when Jar Jar came on the scene, it was a reminder for all of us that Star Wars is for kids. You see, the people who watched the Original Trilogy in theaters were in their 30s and 40s, and people like me were the children of people who watched it in the theaters. But Jar Jar said it's time for some newer, younger fans and provided a low barrier to entry for them. And the newer, younger fans that Jar Jar pulled in, and more importantly, the toy sales that came with them, are the reason that we're still getting new Star Wars today. But Jar Jar wasn't just a welcome to new fans, it was also a warning to the old fans like myself. Sure, we'll give you what you know, but we're also going to give you something new. And some fans took that as a challenge. In come the gatekeepers, the Jar Jar haters, the Rey Skywalker haters, the whatever haters. Now I totally understand why they do it. There is a certain amount of pride and status that comes with exclusivity, but Star Wars doesn't want to be exclusive. There's no gatekeeping in this galaxy. Jar Jar told all of us old fans it's time to welcome someone new into the galaxy. Some of us listened and some of us didn't. But enough of us did that Star Wars got to continue. We wouldn't have Clone Wars or Rebels or sequels or all these TV shows that we're getting without Jar Jar Binks. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It is Star Wars month and Star Wars Day. Happy May the 4th, which means I'm still posting a hot Star Wars take every day until I get canceled. Since it's the big day, let's try a big take. Fans of Slave Leia are bad people. Leia Organa Solo has been a lot of things throughout her life. A princess, a tactician, a general, a wife, a mother, a Jedi, etc. And George Lucas created these Slave Leia scenes with the expectation that we, the audience, would already have a solidified view of Leia as a strong, heroic character. The costume itself took inspiration from this one in The Desert Song from 1929, and The Slave Girl from 1947. A bit on the nose there. The costume is designed to portray Leia as someone who is helpless and exotic, but more importantly, has no agency. And Lucas says that the costume is designed to be a temporary setback, a temporary humiliation which Leia can overcome, ironically using the costume against her captors, which she does. And when you perpetuate that costume outside of the context of the story, you are removing that redemption and playing into the trope that Lucas is trying to subvert. Now, because our experiences of literature affect our behavior, perpetuating this trope without subverting it has some real-world consequences. Many extremist online groups perpetuate the idea that women should not have autonomy over themselves, that they should be treated as property for others, and that heroism or good deeds should be rewarded with feminine affection. Need I remind you that after Leia rescues herself, she is further rescued by Luke with a kiss and a swing. Sure, it is a callback to episode 4, but it is also a continuation of the trope that heroism is rewarded with physical affection. And the Supreme Court just drafted an overturn of Roe v. Wade, which could potentially codify the idea that women don't have control over their own bodies. It's Slave Leia without the redemption. Now, I follow a lot of cosplayers on this app and the same ones on Instagram, and some of them have dressed up as Slave Leia, and they worked hard on themselves and their costumes, and I'm proud of them. And a lot of these cosplayers pay homage to the liberation of Slave Leia in their photo shoots or their costumes. And I think this is super constructive and way better than presenting the character in the costume as is. And this illustrates one of the main problems of trying to subvert tropes in literature. If your audience doesn't know what you're trying to do, you may just be perpetuating a negative trope. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm going to be posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 5, so let's go with Star Wars divided the toy industry. Now, we all know the story about how George Lucas gambled the success of Star Wars on its toy sales. In 1977, Kenner got the exclusive rights to Star Wars toys in perpetuity, forever. And when Kenner was bought by Hasbro, Hasbro got the exclusive rights to Star Wars forever. And in January of this year, Hasbro renewed that contract with Disney for all of Lucasfilm's properties, including Star Wars and Indiana Jones, forever. So Hasbro has the exclusive rights to Star Wars toys, but they can license it out. Funko needs to check with Hasbro before they make Star Wars Pops. Lego has to check with Hasbro before they can make Star Wars building toys. Now, I talk about pretend play a lot in my Lego videos, but pretend play wouldn't exist the way it does today without Star Wars. Star Wars perfected the process of making toys based on what kids see on TV and the movies. Power Rangers, Transformers, He-Man, My Little Pony, none of that would have existed without Star Wars. But it's not just about making cool toys, it's about selling cool toys. And as the fans of Star Wars get older, the types of toys that are selling change. So the vast majority of money spent on toys is not by people who will play with the toys, but by people who will collect them. I went to Toys R Us a couple weeks ago because those still exist in Canada, and I didn't see a single Star Wars toy in the Star Wars aisle. Only collectibles. They had the Black Series, of course, and they didn't have any regular lightsabers, just the buildable kind. And they also had these guys, and for the life of me, I don't know who this is. And to be honest, I haven't seen a standalone playable Star Wars toy that wasn't intended to be collected since I was in Galaxy's Edge. And those are also Hasbro toys. LEGO does it slightly differently by dividing their toys into two categories. They have their UCS sets that are meant to be collected and displayed, and then they have their smaller sets that are specifically meant for play. But even these ones get collected, especially if they have minifigures. And as I was walking through Toys R Us, I saw the same thing with all of the other licenses: Harry Potter, WWE, Jurassic World. Now, advertising that says gotta catch 'em all, collect all of the things has been around forever, but now we're shifting to just selling incomplete toys, or selling toys in packaging that is meant to be displayed. The focus of toys has shifted from playing with toys to owning toys, and this shift has been pushed by the customers of Hasbro and Star Wars. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm gonna have a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's Revenge of the Sixth, and the sequel trilogy had the best lightsabers. In the Orig Tridge, the lightsabers were just shiny sticks, so that light would reflect off of them and onto the set and actors. They tried using shiny spinny sticks, but that didn't really work for combat because they kept breaking, so just shiny sticks it is. In the prequel trilogy, they used brightly colored sticks that could easily be tracked, so the lightsabers could be added in post. This had the added side effect of not casting light on the actors. You can see on Dooku here, the red light is coming from above his head, and the blue light is coming from farther away than the blue lightsaber actually is. An even more egregious example, the part that's closest to both lightsabers is cast in shadow, and the colored light is coming from behind him. One of the most egregious examples of this is the fight between Yoda and Dooku, because spoilers, Yoda was just as fake as the lightsabers, which means he could be realistically lit by them, but Dooku couldn't. The sequel trilogy used pretty much Force Effects lightsabers with highly saturated colors. This means that when lightsabers were ignited, the characters and the set lit up with those colors. Anyone who works in film or animation will tell you that realistic light can make or break a scene. That's why I film my TikToks like this and not like this. So having the colored light actually come from the lightsaber not only makes it more realistic because it's actually real, but it also subconsciously makes it more immersive. This is why when Rey and Finn and Kylo ignited their lightsabers for the first time, we felt it, whereas when Luke did it, it was sort of just a cool thing to see. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 7, and 4 out of the 5 most recent Star Wars movies have been rallying points for white supremacists, and that's good, actually. I grew up in the American public school system, and they had, and I heard still have, a very interesting way of teaching history. When it comes to any violent conflict, not only is America the good guys, but they are often the underdog, the rebel, or the reluctant hero. This also applies to conflicts where America is clearly in the wrong, like in the continued Middle East conflicts or in South America, if they're taught at all. This even applies to conflicts where America is on both sides. I grew up learning that the Civil War was about ending slavery and uniting the Union. We were the reluctant heroes. But people in the South learned that it was about stopping Northern aggression and states' rights. They were the rebels. So no matter where you are in America, if you grow up in the public school system the same way I did and compare that to Star Wars, you are the Rebel Alliance. Now, George Lucas has said multiple times that America is not the Rebel Alliance. America is the Empire. But a lot of people like to ignore that. And Star Wars has always been a commentary on current politics. Now, I'll be honest, I did not live in America when the sequel trilogy came out. I thought Disney was ham-handling the point until I moved back to the States. Then I got back to America and I saw people openly spouting Nazi propaganda and symbolism, and attacking the Capitol even though the Capitol did nothing to stop their rise to power. And fighting against them were the pro-diversity, pro-LGBTQIA+, oftentimes female-led, purple hair having resistance. So now a scary number of Star Wars fans have to reckon with the idea that their enemies in real life are the good guys in Star Wars? And the response that I see most often to this is that Star Wars has become too political. Star Wars has become too woke. Disney has ruined Star Wars. But if you go back and re-examine the old stuff, you'll realize that Star Wars has always been this political, and this group has always been the good guys. So if you're part of one of these groups and you value Star Wars and it's a part of your life, then you have to re-evaluate your connection with Star Wars and your understanding of history. You have to learn more, and that's good. And the people who resist this idea are continually getting louder and getting more pushback, which means the community as a whole is progressing forward, which is also good. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. Content warning for this one: self-destructive behavior. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 8, and toxic positivity in the Star Wars community is good and necessary. Before this month started, I did see a lot of posts on TikTok and other social media talking about the toxic positivity in the Star Wars community. For those of you who don't know, toxic positivity in the Star Wars community involves praising Star Wars without criticism, but also antagonizing those who do criticize Star Wars. Now, toxic positivity, just like toxic negativity, is still toxic, but the toxic positivity doesn't come from nowhere. The paradox of tolerance says that if a society wants to be tolerant, it must not tolerate intolerance, because if it does, intolerance will take over. And likewise, the toxic positivity in the Star Wars community rose to counter the rampant toxic negativity, because the toxic negativity has real-world consequences. Ahmed Best tried to take his own life. Jake Lloyd tried to take his own life. Kelly Marie Tran tried to take her own life. Daisy Ridley, Oscar Isaac, and John Boyega are not returning to Star Wars. Now, this is the internet. Everything is exaggerated. I am exaggerated. Do you think I talk like this in real life? And because the negativity was getting exaggerated, the positivity had to get exaggerated in response. And toxic positivity has become the sort of blanket solution to any negativity, because especially with the new Star Wars and the new Star Wars discourse, it is increasingly difficult to sort out the legitimate criticism from the people that I talked about in yesterday's video who deserve to be pushed back against. Because Star Wars, just like any other piece of literature, does have its flaws. But until we can come together and have a civil discussion about what those are and what we can do to improve them, the toxic positivity will push back against the toxic negativity. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. And for day 9, let's go to Galaxy's Edge. Not really. I'm not going to go to Florida for a TikTok. That would be crazy. Could you imagine? Today's hot take is that Batuu is the second best place they could have set Galaxy's Edge. For those of you who don't know, Black Spire Outpost is the theme of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge in Disney World and Disneyland. It is set on the planet Batuu, which was created specifically for the theme park. And, just like anything in Star Wars, Batuu was canonized through books and comics and toys and even a Lego set. And the cast members of the theme park are encouraged to create their own backstory, as complicated or as simple as they want it to be, with the one restriction being they have never left Batuu. So aside from the meet and greet characters like Rey and Chewie and Kylo, none of the other residents of Black Spire Outpost can exist in other Star Wars media outside of Galaxy's Edge. Now, canonically, the story of Galaxy's Edge takes place between episodes 8 and 9, but because it's an isolated planet with isolated people, it doesn't have to. And presumably, as the years go by and Star Wars continues to change, Disney can easily retheme the land to whatever the current theatrical release is. Now, the reason I think this is a good choice is because it doesn't break the immersion like other immersive theme parks do. For example, the Moara Valley next door takes place sometime after the first Avatar movie, but with 4 more movies coming out, that timeline is obscured. And the Wizarding World of Harry Potter includes events from almost every single movie, sometimes in the same ride. Which means that in these other theme parks, you are visiting the world of a movie, but in Galaxy's Edge, you are just visiting a world. And one of the ways it does this is by having similar yet distinct sets from what we've already seen in Star Wars. One half of Black Spire Outpost is kind of like Yavin 4 and kind of like Agent Kloss, and the other part is kind of like Tatooine and kind of like Jedha. so you can have these experiences and feel that environment without interrupting the story of the movies. Now, the reason that I say Batuu is the second best option is because Disney would never do the first best option, which is to have two planets. Instead of Batuu East and Batuu West, they could have just had two separate planets with similar experiences in both, so that if you only visit one, you're not missing out, but if you visit both, you have a heightened experience. And if you have the opportunity to go to Galaxy's Edge or to go on the Halcyon Star Cruiser, I encourage you to do so in character. It is a way better experience than just visiting a theme park. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. This is my favorite part of Disney's Galaxy's Edge, and I think the only way that people should experience the theme park, going in character. If you're over the age of 14 and it's not Halloween, you're not allowed to wear costumes at Disney parks, and this rule has led to the rise of Disney bounding, dressing in normal clothes that evoke Disney characters. But Galaxy's Edge is supposed to be an immersive experience, so Disney actually encourages bounding there. It's called Batuu bounding, or wearing your Batuu best. Batuu bounding is essentially dressing up as someone who wouldn't look out of place in the Star Wars universe. This photo is actually from Hyperspace Props, and they make a lot of bounding accessories. So this involves vests and tunics and boots and a lot of texture in the fabric and greeblies all over. Something really Star Warsy. Now, I've gone in my Batuu best, but I've also gone in normal clothes, and let me tell you, the cast members will treat you differently if you are in costume. They will use in-universe vocabulary with you. They will role play a little bit more than if you weren't into costume. It's a very cool experience. So this is where going in character, which is a step above just dressing up, comes in. Because when a resident of Blackspire Outpost asks you what planet you're from, you can't just say Planet Canada. If you can, just like in D&D or any other role-playing game, create a character for yourself. Create a backstory for yourself inside the Star Wars universe that you can then play up when you're having these interactions. But also remember that Galaxy's Edge takes place between episodes 8 and 9. There is a resistance base there, and there is a First Order outpost. So your character needs to fit into that part of the timeline. For example, part of my bound one of the days was this jacket here, which has a Jedi patch on it, but if I got caught by the First Order, I could just and switch it up with a First Order patch or an Empire patch or whatever. And the video that you commented on, I'm wearing part of my costume. It's a former New Republic researcher. And the name badge is just my name. I'm bad at coming up with character names. And my character is from Jeddah and collects kyber crystals for research. That's why my character went to Blackspire Outpost in the first place. He heard that Doc Ondar was amassing a collection of kyber crystals and he wanted to check it out. Now, I'm an annual pass holder. I go to theme parks all the time, but more importantly, I watch the people that go to theme parks. And a lot of people go to theme parks to escape the stress of their everyday lives. But if you just show up and expect the magic to take all that stress away, it's not going to happen. So going in costume and in character and pretending to be someone else for a few hours is where the real escapism is. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 10, so let's go with the Jedi should not have let the clones develop a personality. One of the standout features of the Clone Wars series is that each clone is unique and has their own personality and brings something special to the table, which is great for storytelling and TV shows, not so good for warfare. Yes, it helps them get along and work together, but I'd argue that that's not a closer bond than their programming gave them, with the added bonus of the emotional damage if they lose one of their friends versus losing a random fellow soldier. You see, the clones are meant to be soldiers, not friends, which is why they're so resistant to the idea that they have value when people like Yoda and Plo Koon introduce them to it. But sir, we're just clones. No Pumu. Goosebumps every time. Some level of working togetherness, like watching each other's five, is useful and was in the programming. But going back to rescue a fallen brother is great for storytelling, but not great for staying alive. This also goes against the MO of the Jedi, who normally admonish affection, but now force the clones against their programming to become affectionate. If attachment is a weakness, why would you force your clones to become attached to each other and you, unless you're building up emotional suspense for Order 66? You see, in the live-action movie and the 2D Clone Wars, the clones are doing their job and the Jedi are doing their job. And yes, Order 66 is terrifying, but it's not devastating. What Dave Filoni did in his Clone Wars series was made us have an emotional attachment to the clones to make Order 66 worse. Because in the end, allowing the clones to be unique didn't help them. They still got Order 66 that they did. And allowing the clones to express their personality has long-term consequences, like desertion. Yes, I'm including Rex and his squad. And I bet if it's different in the comics and the books, someone's going to point it out in the comments. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. And since I'm streaming LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga tonight at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, let's talk about how this is the worst LEGO video game. In previous videos, I've talked about how LEGO recontextualizes some of its licenses to make them more child appropriate. And one of the ways it does this is through video games. In the LEGO superhero video games, for example, they create an entirely new story so that kids don't need to be familiar with the comic books or the movies in order to enjoy the story of the game. This is doubly helpful when they include characters like Deadpool and Wolverine who may not be appropriate for kids in their movie and book form. Likewise, in other games like Jurassic World and Indiana Jones and the previous LEGO Star Wars games, LEGO takes story beats and characters and creates a truncated version of the plot. They reduce a lot of the complexity, they lower the emotional stakes, and of course reduce the violence as well, but it's still a comprehensive story. Even in the original LEGO Star Wars games where there's no dialogue, you can still piece together the story, no pun intended, just from the actions of the characters. All of that put together means that you can play the original LEGO Star Wars games without having seen Star Wars and still understand what's going on. But unfortunately, that's not the case for LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. In order to understand this video game, you need to already be familiar with the characters, the locations, and the plot of the movies. Sure, there are cutscenes and character moments that cleverly reuse and recontextualize dialogue from the movie and certain scenes, but none of it is strung together in a cohesive narrative. Now you may be thinking, why does that matter? Who would pick up this game if they haven't already seen Star Wars? But it's worse than that. I cannot count how many times I've rewatched the first 6 Star Wars movies as a kid, but I've only seen the prequels twice each, and apparently that's not enough. People who have been watching my previous stream will know how much I struggled with character and story while playing through those sequences of the game, simply because I don't remember something from the movies. So while the game is fun, I feel like I'm only enjoying half of it because I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of these movies. Whereas I've only seen the Jurassic Park series one time through and I don't remember most of it, but I could still enjoy and comprehend the story in the LEGO version of the video game. But anyone who does watch my streams know that we're not actually paying attention to the plot, we're just here for a good time. So follow me there if you want to watch LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and follow me here if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 12, and surviving Order 66 is a really boring trope. In Rebels, Kanan Jarrus tells us that there were once 10,000 Jedi, and after Order 66, there were less than 100. But according to Wikipedia, we have documentation of over 200 Jedi surviving these attacks. In addition to that, there is no source to back up his 10,000 number. There were 212 Jedi in the Battle of Geonosis, and we've only seen a couple dozen throughout the Clone Wars. Out of those, less than 50 have been reported killed by Order 66. If that 10,000 number is accurate, 9,000 of them would have nothing to do with the Galactic Republic and would have been nowhere near Order 66. So if we're just looking at confirmed cases in canon, 4 times as many Jedi survived Order 66 than those killed by it. In addition to that, I've seen a lot of OCs that are Jedi who have survived Order 66. AO3 has 1,600 stories tagged with surviving Order 66. And I've seen people around my age Batu bounding as Jedi who survived Order 66. How? That was 43 years ago. Now, I get the impulse. Against all odds, against the Grand Army of the Republic, against the treachery, your character survived. But if everyone's surviving, then it's kinda not that big of a deal. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 13, and the Kiwi accents in Star Wars are the product of genetic engineering. We'll start with the obvious ones: Temuera Morrison, Daniel Logan, and Bodhi Taylor, who all played the clones in the live-action movies. And of course, the newer addition, Michelle Ang, who plays Omega in Bad Batch and is also from New Zealand. Now, the reason the Kaminoans are so keen on cloning is because they also like to do genetic tampering on themselves. This is why Tan Wei has a Kiwi accent, and Prime Minister Lama Su has, well, an Australian accent, but to Americans it will sound very similar. Now, bioengineering is fairly common across the entire galaxy, whether it's for cosmetics or farming or making this guy. So it's not unreasonable to think that normal people would have genetic tweaks here and there. And since we don't know too much about the origins of Captain Typho, aside from the fact that he doesn't look like his known relatives at all, he and Queen Apelana may have had minor medical genetic adjustments that also gave them Kiwi accents. Which brings us to the big question, Jango Fett. Why would some random Mandalorian foundling have the most perfect genetic code in the entire galaxy to base a soldier off of? Because remember, the Kaminoans only changed genetics for aging. They kept the rest of Jango in the clones. And we, the audience, don't even know the origins of Jango Fett. He purposefully obscures it when he talks to other people. So what if he himself is the product of genetic engineering? This would make Jango Fett the Rocket Raccoon of Star Wars, a discarded science experiment that ends up saving the galaxy. Now, obviously, that's not how accents work in our world, but who says the rules can't be different in Star Wars? Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. History is an interesting thing. We know only the versions that we are told, but that does not mean that there are not other truths. That is a quote from Baba Joe. He's a new Kosian, a genetically modified subspecies of the Kosian, created specifically to colonize the planet of Kos Secunda. If you ever find yourself taking Star Wars too seriously, just repeat that last sentence to yourself. The first time we see Baba Joe is in 2014 in this Star Wars Force for Change video. He then makes another appearance at 2015 San Diego Comic-Con before his first official appearance in The Force Awakens and subsequent Star Wars literature. To me, Baba Joe embodies Star Wars. He is a storyteller. He goes from village to village and tells stories often fabricated to the children there. And like all stories and all history, there is a lesson in there. So you can choose to learn that lesson or you can choose to ignore it. But at the end of the day, don't forget, it's a story told to children by a weird puppet with snakes in his backpack. I would love to see Baba Joe telling his story about how his creatures are actually responsible for destroying the Death Star, and some nerd on Jakku says, actually, that's not canon. Your sources are bad. I think a lot of people on the internet like to think that we can subsist on facts and logic alone, but we can't. The human brain is wired for stories. And stories mean whatever we want them to mean. And this guy embodies that notion perfectly. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 14, and this is the worst scene in the Star Wars saga. If you ask anyone who worked on the sequel trilogy, they will tell you that the whole purpose of those 3 movies was to pass the torch. These were old characters handing the galaxy and the story over to a new generation, new characters, and new ideas. And this scene was the culmination of that transition. I cannot explain to you how overwhelmed I felt when I saw it for the first time in the theater. It felt like we were going to get something new. And then a large part of the Star Wars community saw what was going on and said no. We don't want anything new. We don't want a new guard. We don't want the torch handed over. We want the same stuff we've been getting for the last 40 some odd years. And now, because Lucasfilm and Disney are companies that need to make money, that's exactly what we're getting. The Mandalorian seemed like something new, but really it was just the cold Mandalorian bounty hunter that everyone was hoping Boba Fett was. And Boba Fett tried to do something new, but scrapped it halfway through to bring back the Mandalorian and Ahsoka and 1980s Luke Skywalker. And soon we'll be getting Obi-Wan Kenobi and Ahsoka and Andor and Lando and droids and the New Republic something and Rogue Squadron, all these characters that we've already seen. And what makes this scene particularly devastating is that whether you like it or not, all the setup to create these characters and put them into the world is now in the garbage can. Because these actors said they're not coming back. The reason this is the worst scene is because it's a promise that will never come true. And I honestly don't know when we'll see something new from Star Wars on our screens. Because this was the moment to grab onto, and we lost it. So follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. Now it's day 14, but I'm filming this on day 7, and I just posted day 6, which is about lightsabers, and I want to talk about that. As of recording, it's been about 26 hours since I posted the video. I've gotten 4 comments saying, this is not a hot take. Filmmaking technology improves over time, so obviously the lightsabers are going to look better in the later movies and shows. Now I agree with that, but I also want to add that when your visual effects have to interact with actors and props and the sets, having those interactions be as practical as possible makes it way more immersive. That's what they tried to do with the original trilogy, and I think that's what they succeeded in doing in the sequel trilogy. So if it's not a hot take, why do I have twice as many comments as of filming and 2 concurrent arguments talking about how bad the sequel lightsabers are? If I had to guess, it's because I mentioned something the sequels objectively did well without saying anything negative about them. Like I said, the goal of this series is to get canceled by the Star Wars community, so I am being purposefully inflammatory with my thesis statements. And I see this all the time on other creators' videos about the sequels. There are always a lot of really negative comments about the topic. But the funny thing about my lightsaber video is that you can't reasonably say anything negative about the topic. The lightsabers are objectively better. So a lot of commenters on that video had to change the subject from lightsaber effects to lightsaber choreography just so that they could say something negative. Is it really that hard for a Star Wars fan to just admit that something is good about the sequels and leave it there? Or do we always have to say something negative about the sequels? Because if we always have to have a negative opinion of Star Wars, then we're only going to get bad Star Wars moving forward. Like I said in yesterday's video, your yesterday, not my yesterday, Disney is already catering to people who don't want new Star Wars. If we always keep adding negativity to our conversations, then they're going to start catering to people who hate Star Wars. The Star Wars Holiday Special, the legendary worst Star Wars, came back to Galaxy's Edge last year. And the 1985's Droids TV show, which I think is fun but isn't good by any stretch, has about a 60% rating. We're getting a reboot on Disney+. So I'm not even exaggerating. The more we say Star Wars is bad, the more bad Star Wars we're gonna get. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 15 and lightsaber colors don't make any sense. In 1977, we get our first glimpse of lightsabers, and they are blue, blue, and red. Fast forward to 1983, and Luke Skywalker has a new lightsaber following the schematics that he found in Obi-Wan Kenobi's old hutch. But instead of having a blue blade like Obi-Wan's, it now has a green blade. And if you dig into the Star Wars lore, there's a very interesting reason why. Luke Skywalker is fighting outside, and blue lightsabers don't show up against the sky. Cue the expanded universe and the fandom trying to figure out the difference between a blue lightsaber and a green lightsaber and what other colors there could be. I think Luke even had a yellow one at one point. Fast forward to Attack of the Clones, and Ahmed Best, Samuel Jackson, and George Lucas are having a conversation about lightsabers. And George Lucas says the good guys get green and blue, the bad guys get red. That's just how it works. And Samuel Jackson says, and I quote, no purple lightsaber. And George Lucas says, and I quote, you might get purple. And that's it. Cue the expanded universe and the fandom again trying to figure out how lightsaber colors work, and the accepted story in canon today comes down to the Kyber crystals, which start off white, but as they get attuned to the Jedi, they change colors. In the Gathering arc of the Clone Wars, the crystals that the Padawan are looking for are all white, and glow blue, but they still produce green and blue lightsabers. Is that because they are attuned to their Jedi? No. The crystals were already attuned to the Padawan before the Padawan even found them. That's how they called out to them. That's how they were found. Which means that these white crystals that glow blue can also make green blades. Even in the visual dictionaries like these, they are white crystals that glow blue. And of course in Rogue One we see a white kyber crystal. And in the sequels we see a red kyber crystal, which, fine, evil people corrupt the crystal, make it bleed, turn it red, whatever. But if you purify a corrupt crystal, you get white or yellow. But in the Clone Wars, all the Temple Guards had yellow lightsaber pikes, double-sided, which means 2 primary crystals. And if the Sith have been gone for millennia, who's been corrupting all those crystals? So in conclusion, the only thing that makes sense is if lightsabers are only blue and red. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by Star Wars fans. I can smell it getting closer. It's day 17, and isn't it weird that the one black stormtrooper that we see on screen just can't conform to First Order standards? Finn was conditioned from birth and reconditioned 3 more times before the movie even starts. But it's almost as if it's in his nature to not follow orders. Even one of the good ones will act out when they witness state-sanctioned violence against innocent people. Maybe he should have just complied. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of racism presented unopposed in Star Wars. Because as woke as people want to say the new Star Wars is, it's not actually that woke. The new Star Wars is neoliberal at best, which means addressing the issues on a symptomatic level, but not fixing the systems that are causing the issues. Think Joe Biden, Margaret Thatcher, the Harry Potter series, etc. And part of neoliberalism today is performative wokeism, taking the ideas and the symbolism of the woke movement and co-opting them to preserve these systems of oppression. And one of the most common ways of doing that is just by inserting people of color in random places. Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga did this as well. When you shoot off a stormtrooper's helmet, sometimes it's a person of color. And that doesn't really mesh with the story or the messaging, but it is an example of performative wokeism. Because Disney doesn't want to be pro-diversity, they want to make money from people who are pro-diversity. This is why they supported the Don't Say Gay bill until they got a public backlash. But all of that misses the point of the video that you commented on. Because before Disney bought Star Wars, before Lucasfilm, before ILM, George Lucas had personal beef with the Vietnam War and wanted to make a movie about it. And because American imperialism, not all white Americans, American imperialism is the bad guy in that movie, they continue to be the bad guy as the movie progresses. That's just how the story works. Because when it comes to Star Wars, who the good guys are doesn't really matter. The good guys are whoever American imperialism is fighting against. Back in the 60s, the American Empire was fighting against the Ewoks in the forest moons of Vietnam, and today they're fighting the idea of diversity in their own country. So the good guys in Star Wars have always been and will always be whoever American imperialism hates. But Star Wars is never going to talk about it on a systemic level because Disney is part of the system. A lot of Disney's success comes from making pro-colonial, anti-diversity propaganda. They're not going to stop now. And this is what I talked about in my first video in this series. Disney always makes the bad guy a bad person instead of a bad system because they're part of the bad system. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 18, and what Anakin Skywalker did to the separatist leaders on Mustafar would probably have garnered praise from the Galactic Republic. We, as the audience, know that Anakin is being corrupted by Palpatine to join the dark side. And we, as the audience, know that Palpatine is on both sides of the Galactic Civil War, pitting the separatists against the Republic to gain power for himself and establish the Galactic Empire. But who else knows that? As far as the citizens of the Galactic Republic and the citizens of the Confederacy of Independent Systems are concerned, this is a legitimate galactic civil war with 2 legitimate factions. And as far as the leadership of the Galactic Republic and the Confederacy know, this is a legitimate conflict with legitimate factions. So Anakin's defeat of Dooku and Obi-Wan's defeat of Grievous and Anakin's execution of the other CIS leaders would have been seen as a definitive victory for the Republic. And on the other side, CIS leadership knew that there was somebody above them pulling all the strings, Lord Sidious. But if CIS citizens knew that, there would definitely have been a revolt. The whole point of the Confederacy of Independent Systems is that they are independent and they are autonomous. So if they found out their leaders were taking orders from some shadowy figure that they've never heard of, then they might have a problem with that. So as far as CIS citizens are concerned, all of their leadership has been executed, and that is a humiliating defeat. So as far as the people of the galaxy know, the Republic fought against an enemy for 2.5 years, and the Empire defeated them and another enemy, the Jedi, in a day. I don't know about you, but if I was a galactic senator in that circumstance, I would feel pretty good about this whole Empire thing. So meanwhile, Padme and Bail and Mon and their friends are like, oh no, democracy is dying. But they're just blinded by their ideology. They're ignoring the tangible results that the Empire had. The only reason that we as the audience agree with them is because we know how manufactured the conflict was. Meanwhile, the citizens of the new Empire know that the Empire takes swift and decisive action and gets results. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by Star Wars fans. It's day 16, and Rogue One made A New Hope 9/11. Now, we know the obvious parallels. Jeddah City is based on Jeddah City, the capital of Saudi Arabia. And the pilot from Rogue One is a native of planet Saudi Arabia, and he's played by Riz Ahmed, who also played a terrorist in the movie Four Lions. It's great. Check it out if you can. And then, of course, in A New Hope, the rebels use their spaceships to fly and blow up the big gray Empire hubris building. But the implication of Rogue One is that the Empire knew this was going to happen the whole time. Director Krennic knew that there was a mole on his Death Star team feeding information to the Rebel Alliance. He knew that the Rebel Alliance got their hands on Project Stardust from Scarif, and while he didn't know about the exhaust port itself, he knew that there was a vulnerability on the Death Star that could be exploited by Rebel pilots. And he knew that the Rebels were relying on the help of an extremist partisan, but not just any extremist partisan, someone who used to be an ally of the Galactic Republic, but was pushed to extremism because of the destructiveness of the Galactic Civil War on his home planet. And despite knowing all of that information, the Empire refused to act until the Rebel pilots were flying towards the Death Star. But the Rebels didn't come up with this plan on their own. They used Imperial intelligence, Imperial equipment, and even Imperial personnel in order to set their plan in motion. Which means that the Empire actually funded the rebels who ended up attacking them. Now, the Empire could have taken the Battle of Yavin 4 as a learning moment. Their oppression and indiscriminate destruction of other planets and peoples is causing a violent backlash. There needs to be another way to secure power. But instead, they built another Death Star. When their oppression and violence didn't work, they turned to more oppression and violence. Now, the connection is already pretty clear. I don't think I need to philosophize more on this one, except to say that we cheered when the Death Star was destroyed because the Empire deserved it. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 20, and this one has to do with what's been going on in the comments of this series so far. As you can probably tell, I'm mostly only citing movies and TV shows for this series. That's because I've only seen movies and TV shows. As of recording, I've only actually read 2 Star Wars books to completion, Death Troopers and Old Wounds, and that's it. But that's not the point. The point is that the movies and TV shows which make up the foundation of Star Wars canon now should be able to stand on their own. If someone can criticize something from a Star Wars movie and the only response is to cite a novelization or supplementary media or, God forbid, legends, that's not an adequate response to that criticism. For example, the title Huttslayer. Sounds cool, I'm going to start using it, but that doesn't change any of the cultural impact between 1983 and 2016 when Star Wars Bloodline came out. And because the movies and TV shows have more of a cultural impact than any of the supplementary material, that's not an adequate response to the problem now. Even the novelizations of the movies are only canon when they don't contradict what we see on screen. Now, this is not a problem that is unique to Star Wars. When Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. came out, it got a lot of pushback because people were saying you need to watch the TV show in order to understand the movies. This is not the case. The movies still stood on their own, and the TV shows added to it. And it's the same case with Star Wars. The movies stand on their own, and the shows add to that, and the video games add to that, and the novelizations add to that. But this supplementary material should not and cannot be necessary to understand the movies. And we're all nerds here. I'm dressed up to go to the movie theater, and we love flexing our niche knowledge of these nerdy topics. And usually it's pretty enjoyable. I've gotten a lot of good reading recommendations from these comments. But citing external and supplementary sources in order to address internal inconsistencies undermines the entire canon. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you.
I really want to see Jar Jar Binks return in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series.
Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. That was Steezy Black, and if you like my takes, his are even better. It's day 21, and I don't just want to see Jar Jar Binks and Obi-Wan Kenobi. I want to see sad Jar Jar. When we meet Jar Jar in episode 1, he's kind of bumbling, he's kind of stumbling, but he has this vague notion that his actions have consequences. Jar Jar knows that he was banished for being clumsy. He knows that his actions have consequences, even though he can't quite connect the dots to figure out how that works. But he tries his best anyway. On a personal note, this is very relatable. Growing up, I got in trouble a lot for things that I did not, and still do not, understand, but I keep trying my best anyway. And throughout the prequels and the Clone Wars, we see Jar Jar putting in an honest effort to do what's best and help other people. And even though he isn't always successful, he tends to fail upwards until we get to episode 3. In episode 3, we see him move to grant emergency powers to the Chancellor, something that he was counseled on, something that he genuinely thought was the right thing to do. But it wasn't. So in Kenobi, I want to see a Jar Jar wrestling with the idea that he did all the right things, but it ruined the galaxy. Because he doesn't know about the corruption. He doesn't know that he was manipulated by a Sith Lord. He doesn't know that the Clone Wars were fake. But he does know what it's like to be a second-class citizen on his own planet, and he's done that to the rest of the galaxy. And he knows what it's like to have his entire community be ashamed of him for making a mistake. So he might feel that now on a galactic scale. Maybe I'm projecting my own life experience here, but as far as Jar Jar is concerned, he didn't actually do anything wrong, but now the entire galaxy has to face consequences. To borrow from the Trekkies real quick, it is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose. That's not a weakness, that's life. And that's Jar Jar's life. Now, I don't know where the story goes from there. It could be a tragedy, it could be a redemption. That's up to whoever's brave enough to write it. But it's a story that I want to see. So follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you, and follow Steezy Black if you don't want Star Wars ruined for you. The Gungan has been there as long as Mappo has. Longer, probably. Since children started coming in by the shipload as refugees, the Gungan has served them, performing for the kids once or twice a day. He does tricks, he juggles, he falls over, and he shakes his head and his eyes roll around inside their fleshy stalks. He makes goofy sounds and does strange little dances. Sometimes it's the same performance repeated. Sometimes the Gungan does different things. Things you've never seen. Things you'll never see again. Just a few days ago, he splashed into the fountain's center, then pretended to have the streams shoot him way up in the air. He leapt straight up, then back down with a splash. And he leapt from compass point to compass point, back and forth, before finally conking his head on the edge and plopping down on his butt. Shaking his head, tug-wagging. All the kids laughed. Then the Gungan laughed too. The clown, they called him. Bring the clown. We want to see the clown. We like it how he juggles glombo shells, or spits fish up in the air and catches them, or how he dances around and falls on his butt. That's what the kids say. The adults, though, they don't say much about him, or to him, and no other Gungans come to see him either. Nobody even says his name. Jar Jar shrugs. All and nobody's talking to Misa, too. I noticed that. Why don't they talk to you? I'm no so sure. The Gungan makes a sound. Misa thinking it's 'cause of Jar Jar making some mistakens. Big mistakens. The Gunga bosses banished me long ago.
Missa no been to home in forevers, and dessa hessa nabu think I helped the O Empire. For a moment, the Gungan looks sad, staring off at an unfixed point. He shrugs. I don't know. The Mepo wonders if he knows more than he's saying. I didn't think you helped the Empire, Mepo says, without being sure of anything. But he doesn't get the feeling the strange fellow would have done anything like that. Not on purpose. He's just a sweet old clown. Maybe you just don't belong anywhere, like me. Maybe that Okide. Maybe it is, Okide, Mepo sighs. I don't think I'm going anywhere, Jar Jar. I don't go somewhere either. Maybe we can go nowhere together. That bum bad idea. Oh, Mepo dips his chin into his chest. Sorry. But Jar Jar laughs. No, bum bad. Me smiling. We shall be palos, Palo. The Gungan pats the boy on the head. Mepo doesn't know what's going on, but Bombad must mean good somehow, so he goes with it. Can you teach me to be a clown too? Being clowning is Bombad too. Me teaching you, Sapalo. We're making the whole galaxy smiling, huh? Sounds good to me.
It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 22, and today's hot take comes courtesy of director Rian Johnson. In an interview about The Last Jedi, Johnson says that movies and Star Wars should not cater to fans. He said that as a fan, if you go to the movies and you get exactly what you want, you will leave dissatisfied. Instead, a movie should focus on the story that is engaging and exciting and keeps you guessing. Fans of any franchise love what they have seen, so if you give fans what they like, it is by definition something that they've already seen. There's no excitement there. The reason that Star Wars was so successful in the 70s and 80s is when you sat down in the theater, you didn't know what to expect. You got sci-fi that wasn't quite sci-fi, and fantasy that wasn't quite fantasy. And in the sequel, we got new characters and new creatures and new places and the plot twist of the century. And even for Return of the Jedi, we knew that the Empire had to be defeated, but we didn't know how. So whether you like the movie or not, this is the reason why Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi stands out in the trilogy. The Force Awakens is a beat-for-beat copy of A New Hope because the fans love A New Hope. The Rise of Skywalker brings back old characters and old plot lines and even Luke's homestead because that's what the fans like. But The Last Jedi is different. The Last Jedi was made for a different purpose. It wasn't made for the fans of Star Wars. It was made for the audience of 1977, when people didn't know what to expect. There's new characters, new creatures, new places, new kinds of adventures that they can go on, and a brand new characterization of Luke Skywalker, a character that we've seen since the beginning. I've said this about Lego already. Fans do not know what they want until they get it. Fans know what they like out of what they've already got. And Rian Johnson made a very brave decision to ignore what we've already got. But I think it was the right decision because in the comments of my Star Wars videos so far, The Last Jedi gets the most love and the most hate out of the new trilogy. So good or bad, at least you felt something. Because that's what movies are for. They're supposed to make us feel something. And if we're just sitting there checking off boxes of what the fandom wants to see, then we forget to feel. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 23, and there's no writing in Star Wars. Aurebesh was kind of a late addition to the Star Wars canon. It was created by the fans, of course, and then retroactively added into the screens and the signs so that they weren't in English anymore. When we look at the Aurebesh alphabet, we notice some weird subtleties. The first thing that I notice is how little differentiation there is between letters. If we look at Grek and Usk, for example, if there's any variance in those characters, they become illegible. Same with Osk and Wesk, and Esk and Nern. Now, Arabic is a language that started off like this, with all of the letters being pretty much the same, but over time they added differentiators and diacritics to help read and understand it. And the Aurebesh that we see today doesn't do any of that. And that leads me to believe that Aurebesh just doesn't have room for the variances that would accompany handwriting. These are only okay to be fonts on a computer. And even in our own alphabet, we can see how it goes from more complex to less complex while still maintaining the individual characteristics of each letter. The second subtlety is that the font weight for Aurebesh is very consistent, and in the fonts where it's not consistent, it is very inconsistent. Now, in typefaces today, we have characters that are fixed weight, like this one here, but we also have ones that vary in weight, like this one here. But how a font varies in weight is indicative of how it was written by hand. You'll notice that in Latin and Arabic scripts, the thick lines tend to be the downstrokes, whereas the thin lines tend to be the across strokes. That's because before typefaces, these languages were written with a pen, and when you push the pen down, the nib spreads apart and you get a thicker line. Meanwhile, languages like Chinese have a stroke that starts thick and ends thin. That's because before typing, these languages were written with a brush. And because most of Aurebesh has a fixed weight, and when it doesn't have a fixed weight, it is a completely random weight that doesn't indicate the motion of the letter, I have to assume that it was never written down with a writing instrument. Because there is a place in Latin and other scripts where we do see this kind of uniformity, and that's when it's carved. So I can only assume that the people of the Star Wars galaxy went straight from carving in stone and clay tablets to computers, with no paper and pens and brushes in between. And a similar thing could be said for the other languages that we see in Star Wars as well, like Mandalorian and Huttese. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. Noticed it? Noticed it? No, I suffered through it. For Star Wars month, I wanted to make an accessory for my Batu bound, and I made this bag. It's got calligraphy on it. A lot of calligraphy. And in order to do that, I needed to find an Aurebesh that looked like it could be comfortably handwritten. This cannot be comfortably written. There are too many weird angles and arbitrary stopping points in each character. When you see videos of people writing in Aurebesh here on TikTok or somewhere else, it's very difficult to get into the flow of writing a full word compared to the other languages that we write. So I scoured the internet. I went to Aurebesh fan sites, Aurebesh GitHub repositories, Aurebesh Tumblr, Aurebesh Reddit to find something that looks like it was naturally handwritten. And I found nothing. So using the limited knowledge I have of typefaces and handwriting in Latin, Cyrillic, and Arabic scripts, I tried to reverse engineer Aurebesh. And this is what I came up with. A handwritten script that I think could plausibly evolve into the typeface that we see in the movies. And I solved some of the issues that I talked about in the last video. The N's and the E's now look different, the O's and the W's look different, the B's and the H's look different, and the C's are now one line instead of three. And I also added script calligraphy that is closer to the handwriting and geometric calligraphy that is closer to the typeface. All in all, the bag took an hour, maybe two tops, but figuring out what the letters would look like took about a week. So the character that I bound as is from Jedha, and he and his parents are guardians of the Wills, and they've made it their mission to find and secure Kyber so it can't be used in weapons like Death Stars, Starkillers, or even lightsabers. I need to weather the bag a little bit more, but it's supposed to look like it's been through some scavenging. So we start with Jedha, where he's from, and then this says Kyber Tembleu. It's kind of cut off under the image. This is Jedha City, which was destroyed the day that my character was born, and these are some mounts from the concept art of Rogue One. The inside flap is two prayers from the Guardians of the Wills. The Force is with me, and I am one with the Force. And I fear nothing, because all is as the Force wills it. And the second is just half of a prayer. In life there is the Force, in the Force there is life, and the Force is eternal. On the strap of the backpack, I have some crudely drawn schematics for a lightsaber, but the plan is to cover the entire bag in calligraphy. I just need to find more inspiration as to what to write. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm going to be posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 24, but it's also Tuesday, which means I'm going to be streaming LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga tonight at 6 p.m. Hopefully it works, and hopefully we can start the high ground. You all know the scene. It's over, Anakin. I have the high ground. You underestimate my power. Don't try it. But what if the high ground wasn't an advantage? Then Anakin flips over Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan cuts off all of his limbs. Spoiler alert, I guess. But that would have been the exact same if they had been on equal ground. And Obi-Wan would have had the advantage if he was lower than Anakin when Anakin jumped over him. And from Anakin's perspective, it is his pursuit of the higher ground that ends in his defeat. Now, I'm not a professional sword fighter, but I feel like if you are fighting on a hill and you are lower, you can swing up and away from your body. But if you're higher up, then you need to swing down and towards your own feet. Because having the high ground is a tactical advantage for ranged weapons, not for lightsabers. But they were also next to a lava river, and being on the high ground is better than that, right? Except Anakin was still on his droid, which was floating and had shields. If the lava rises, Anakin would rise with it, and Obi-Wan would have to run. So maybe it was just symbolic. Maybe Obi-Wan had the moral high ground, which is why he left his best friend to burn alive, which was bad for their friendship, sure, but it was also worse for the galaxy. So yeah, join me on stream tonight at 6 p.m. Mountain Time if you want to hear me complain about that for like an hour. Also, how cool is this sweater? I got the sticker and patch to match. These are from Jedi Kaylin. I'll tag her below. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. This hot take is courtesy of Twitch chat from yesterday. If you don't already follow me on Twitch, I stream every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. We just finished the Star Wars prequels in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga. We'll start on A New Hope next Tuesday. Today's hot take is that the Thrawn trilogy and countless other Star Wars expanded universe books are the Star Wars equivalent of Critical Role, or Dimension 20, or Looking for Group, or The Adventure Zone, that genre of storytelling. In 1987, West End Games published Star Wars, the role-playing game. It was based off of their Ghostbusters RPG and played just like your normal tabletop game. And anyone who's played a tabletop RPG will know that you need to pack in a lot of lore into those books. But this was 1987, there wasn't a lot of Star Wars lore to go around, so they ended up creating a lot of it for their game, including different planets and cultures, and even naming the species of aliens that we see in the Orig Tridge. When Timothy Zahn was hired to write for Lucasfilm, Lucasfilm gave him a box of these RPG books in order to lay the foundation for the universe. Lucasfilm considered this game the authoritative source on Star Wars lore, and other authors were encouraged to use it as well, and it's still being used today. A lot of the stuff that we see in the Star Wars canon today was originally created for these game books. So a lot of what these Star Wars expanded universe authors were doing is the same thing that we see from Vox Machina and the McElroy brothers and Dropout. They're diving into an RPG and making a story out of it. And Critical Role and The Adventure Zone are taking those stories and turning them into actual books, which is what the expanded universe is. So follow here if you want Star Wars ruined for you, and follow me on Twitch if you want to join in the conversation. You've stumbled into my trap because it is Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 26, and yes, the dialogue in Star Wars sucks, but that's what makes it important. Let's get back into our time machines back before written language. Stories are shared orally, stories about how the world came into beings, with monsters and deities, and among them is the trickster. The tricksters were important because while the other cast of characters tell you how the world is supposed to be, the trickster tells you how you're supposed to be. Fast forward to feudal times and we have the court jester, the only person in the kingdom allowed to criticize the royalty because they do so from behind the veil of comedy. Court jesters in history and in literature were often important confidants to the royalty because through their comedy they could be brutally honest. Fast forward again to Geoffrey Chaucer, some of the goofiest stories you will ever read in your life. Singing chickens, are you kidding me? But it is still one of the most important pieces of literature in the English language. Fast forward again to William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson criticizing the British crown up, down, left, and right, but doing so with slapstick comedy. Fast forward again to today, where late-night comedians are taken more seriously than actual politicians when it comes to politics, because through their comedy they are allowed to reveal the truth. What is the through line through all of this? If you are goofy, it makes people stop and think about what you're saying. But not everybody. Conspiracy theorists are some of the goofiest people in the world today. The only reason that they can gain traction is because people don't stop and think about how goofy they are. They just keep repeating the same phrases across the internet. This is also why spam emails have weird fonts and typos galore, because if you stop and think about it, you won't fall for it. Star Wars is probably the most poignant and accessible anti-American imperialism literature that we have today, and it gets away with it because of goofy dialogue and pew-pew lasers. So you can laugh at the trickster, you can watch the jester juggle, or you can listen to what they're saying. Attack of the Clones is my favorite of the saga movies, and every time I rewatch it, I learn something new about Star Wars and something new about myself. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 27, and this suggestion also comes from the Twitch chat, specifically from my friend Helga Sanchez, who suggests that Donald Glover's Lando Calrissian is better than Billy D. Williams' Lando Calrissian. I'm going to take that one step further and say Donald Glover's Lando Calrissian is the best cast character in all of Star Wars. The original Star Wars pulls a lot from literary tropes, including having character archetypes instead of actual characters. And two of those archetypes are rogue archetypes, Han Solo and Lando Calrissian. Han Solo is your scruffy-looking nerf herder who is accidentally charming, whereas Lando Calrissian is more put together and is purposefully charming. However, a lot of what we see Lando do in the original trilogy could be considered problematic by today's standards. Now, that's not a bad thing, that's just an example of how our perceptions and values naturally change over time, even the course of 40 years. The point is, you can't copy and paste Billy D. Williams' performance into a modern movie and have it resonate in the same way. This is what happened with The Rise of Skywalker, and people are still complaining about Lando's relationship with Jannah. If you have to ask if someone is flirting or their dad, you've missed the mark. Instead of trying to recreate the character that we've already seen, which Star Wars usually does for its recasts, Donald Glover brings a brand new flavor of charm to the role. He is just as much charming and flirty and scoundrelly as Lando was in the 80s, but now he is in a way that resonates with today's audiences. And Donald Glover is perfect for the role. Not only is he an actor, but he is a comedy writer and a stand-up comedian and a rapper and a producer. His entire career is quickly figuring out the right thing to say and saying it in a way that resonates with people. Donald Glover makes a living off of his word alone, and that's exactly what Lando Calrissian does. His words are as good as credits. I am really excited to see what the new Lando show has to offer, and I hope Donald Glover gets to write on it too. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you, and follow on Twitch if you want to join in the conversation. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 28, and Luke Skywalker believes you can only be one thing. And we meet Luke Skywalker in A New Hope. He wants to be a pilot, and Uncle Owen says he has to wait until after the harvest. Luke Skywalker does not accept this compromise because he thinks you can't be a pilot and a farmer. You can only be one thing. On the Millennium Falcon, Luke is whining like a child about his Jedi training, but also getting excited like a child about his time on the Millennium Falcon's turret, because you can't be a Jedi and a pilot, you can only be one thing. This is also why Luke gets so angry at Han when he leaves for the first time, because you can't be a rebel pilot and a smuggler. In Luke's mind, you can only be one thing. Then Luke becomes a rebel pilot, and Biggs is there, and it's just like shooting womp rats back home. Everything's falling into place until at the last moment, he reluctantly tries to be a Jedi. Then he blows up the Death Star not as a pilot, but as a Jedi. So he abandons the rebellion and abandons his friends so that he can be a Jedi, because you can only be one thing. Sure, he goes back when his friends are in trouble in Cloud City, but instead of making sure that his friends escape properly, he takes up personal beef with Darth Vader because he didn't go to rescue them as their friend, he went as a Jedi. And later on, he goes to rescue Han on Tatooine, but instead of following Leia and Lando's plan, he goes and does his own thing with mind tricks and lightsabers because he didn't come as a friend, he came as a Jedi. And in Return of the Jedi, he boards the Death Star that the rebels are trying to explode because he is not with the rebellion. He is a Jedi. This is the Luke that we see in Book of Boba Fett, who forces Grogu to choose between being a Mandalorian foundling and being a Jedi, because you can only be one thing. And Ahsoka knows this, that's why she and Din keep their distance while this is happening. If you're noticing a pattern here, Luke is putting all of his eggs into the Jedi basket. And oh gosh, I hope he doesn't drop the Jedi basket. Fast forward to the sequel trilogy, and Luke Skywalker has dropped the Jedi basket. He's gone from being one thing to being zero things. He lost his friends because he prioritized being a Jedi over being a friend. He lost the Resistance because he prioritized being a Jedi over being a rebel. He lost his family because he prioritized being a Jedi over taking care of his family. And now that his academy's gone, he has nothing left to fall back onto. So it makes sense that Luke did what anyone who suffered from similar trauma knows not to do, but tends to do anyway. He isolated himself from those who could help. So no wonder he doesn't want to train Rey. No wonder he doesn't want the Jedi to continue. It was the one thing that he defined himself as, and he still failed. And then Rey gave him a spark of hope to try and be a friend again, try to be a rebel again. And that works. Believing in Luke works. Until the end of The Last Jedi, and then they throw that out the window. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community, even if it's late, because I spend the whole day moving. It's day 29, and Darth Vader and Boba Fett are the same character. And we meet Anakin and Boba in episodes 1 and 2 respectively. Yes, they are both children, but they are also both slightly less human. Anakin is a slave and Boba is a clone. By the end of their introductory movies, both have lost their only parent and need to find their place in the galaxy. Anakin is no longer a slave, and Boba takes up the mantle of bounty hunter. They both grow up isolated in their factions, Anakin as a Jedi, Boba as a bounty hunter, and they learn to be the best possible person they could be in their field. And in order to succeed in those factions, both need to repress their emotions and embrace the necessary loneliness that comes with being a Jedi or a bounty hunter. And just when you think all of that work is going to pay off and they have been accepted by their boss, Anakin by Palpatine and Boba by Jabba, they both fall and experience excruciating bodily harm. It's that event that causes them both to give up. Anakin succumbs to the pain and anguish, both physically and through the dark side of the Force. And Boba Fett abandons his bounty hunting life and becomes his own boss and embraces teamwork. Both characters are then redeemed by the son turning against the decisions of the father. Boba Fett redeems himself by turning against Jango Fett's lifestyle, and Anakin is redeemed by Luke believing in him. If these two characters are going through the same storyline beat for beat, why were their receptions so different? I think when it comes to fandom commentators, myself included, there is a certain sense of entitlement. We are expecting to receive something that we will like. And I think that's the difference between Anakin's and Boba's stories. When Anakin is destroyed on Mustafar, Vader gets brand new limbs and he's seen in the next scene standing tall next to the Emperor, whereas Boba has to crawl his way out of the Sarlacc and he spends most of his time recovering in a Bacta tank. And Luke did all the emotional work for Anakin's redemption. Meanwhile, Boba had to spend months with the Sand People learning to be his own person, and even when he teamed up with Fennec, she dismissed it. That's the biggest difference. Vader was given a redemption, but Boba had to redeem himself. And I think that resonates with a lot of us. We're all facing problems that we want fixed, but not a lot of us want to put in the time and effort it takes to fix them ourselves. We don't want to be like Boba, we want to be like Anakin. Follow if you want Star Wars ruined for you. It's Star Wars month, which means I'm posting a hot take every day until I get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 30, and the music that you hear right now, which plays in all the pirate clubs in Clone Wars, is just Hindi music. That's not the hot take, I just think it's weird that they have a second Earth language in Star Wars. My original plan for this hot take was to stitch that really gross video that's going around and talk about the worst fans, but instead I'm gonna talk about the best fans. As we're winding down Star Wars month, I'm seeing a lot of posts and videos from other content creators here on TikTok and on Twitter showing their experiences at Star Wars Celebration. Now, I haven't been to Star Wars Celebration in 10 years. Look how cute I was back then. And it was my first con experience, and it was absolutely life-changing. And if you go back to my pilgrimages video in Batuu, that's part of it, but I think the biggest part were the people that were there. Oftentimes when we interact with fans on the internet, the loudest voices are the loudest voices. They are the people who talk the most. But when you go to these events, be it Star Wars Celebration or your local entertainment expo, you meet creators and artists and cosplayers and musicians. Because I can sit here on TikTok and talk about Star Wars till the Nerf come home, but I'm not adding anything to the fandom or creating anything new. Because the best Star Wars fans, the best anything fans, are those that add to the universe. The storytellers, published or unpublished, the character creators, the costume designers, the art makers, the music makers, those are the best fans. Because at the end of the day, Star Wars is just literature. It's movies and TV shows and books and video games and toys, and you can enjoy those and you can discuss those. But the best thing you can do for any art that you love is make more of it. Even here on TikTok, E.K. Johnston follows me for some reason. That's terrifying. But also Kyber by Chris makes amazing dual Kyber crystals, and Jedi Kaylin makes awesome sweaters that I showed off in a previous video. Lost Girl Mikachu is a cosplayer that did these Star Wars vignettes like a year ago, and if you scroll back through my TikTok, you'll see I participated in some of those too. And with Obi-Wan having just started, I feel like commentators are getting their time in the spotlight, and we should shine some positivity on people who actually make Star Wars. Because Star Wars fans are Star Wars fans, but creators and artists are the best Star Wars fans. Follow if I guess you don't want Star Wars ruined for you anymore. It's Star Wars month, which means I've been posting a hot take every day to get canceled by the Star Wars community. It's day 31, and Star Wars doesn't mean anything. One of my favorite things about people is how we communicate, because a lot of organisms communicate. Dolphins teach their young, elephants have rituals, bees tell each other where the best flowers are, and even grass tells other grass when there's danger. And in addition to all of that, humans also communicate through art. We can take our thoughts, our feelings, our sense of self, and write or draw or paint or take pictures or film. And then we take that art and we put it down somewhere or we post it on the internet, and eventually it is found by people who we don't even know. And what's cool about that is that the artist puts their art down because of who they are, but you pick it up because of who you are. Because the art itself is just color or line or sound or ones and zeros on a server somewhere. But as soon as you look at it, or read it, or watch it, or hear it, or play it, you start interpreting it. And your interpretation is based on all of your experiences up to that point. That's why Star Wars is different when you watch it as a kid versus when you watch it as a grown-up, even if you're rewatching it for the 100th time. Because Star Wars doesn't mean anything when it's sitting on a shelf or sitting on a server somewhere. It gets its meaning when you read it and share it, because the meaning comes from you. This past month, I haven't been talking about Star Wars. I've been talking about me. I've been talking about the world I live in and how I see it, and you've been talking about you. Because Star Wars is just a blank canvas that we can paint ourselves onto. And there's a lot to be said about intent. Everyone who works on Star Wars has put a lot of their own experiences into it. But when you sit in the theater, George Lucas isn't leaning over and whispering the meaning into your ear. You're making your own meaning. And then if you learn about their intents later, it adds to your understanding. So I want to thank everyone who joined me this month and got to share a little bit about themselves. Follow for occasional Star Wars content.